Welcome back to Magic Hour Podcast, everyone. I'm your host, Taylor Paige.
And this is Claire. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
I have been anticipating this episode since last year because it's a topic that I'm so excited about. And I got the download probably like October of last year to do this episode. But it's such a big topic and so much research that it's only now that I'm ready. I have like 7 pages of notes on this. And I was realizing, I was like, with these 7 pages of notes, this could either be like 45 minutes or 3 hours, and I have no idea. So we're probably going to do 2 parts.
I love it. I love when we do 2 parts. It's like to be continued.
Exactly. And I think it's just such a deep topic, and I want to do it justice. It's not my style to lightly touch on things and gloss over them. I like to get really deep. So I think this is definitely a juicy topic. I mean, we talk so much about our Saturn return. It's literally everywhere. The Saturn return is at the age of 29 to 30 when Saturn returns to where it was when you were born. And it's basically signifying that you're an astrological adult. And don't get me wrong, the Saturn return is like so important and it is a huge initiation and it means so much. But that isn't just the end of our big rite of passage astrological moments. There are so many in the 30s and the 40s and even the 50s. But today we're just going to focus on the 30s and the 40s because that's the biggest chunk of our demographic of who's listening to Magic Hour. And I know that we can feel that. Like the 30s and the 40s are freaking wild, man. And there's a lot to say about it.
Yeah, it's so funny. I feel like as a child, we were pitched this crazy idea that once you were 30, you were in old age and your life was over. And that definitely has not been my experience at all. I feel like life just keeps getting richer. And, as you move along your life journey, your sense of self and your relationship to yourself deepens. And my relationships with my friends and family have deepened in ways I couldn't have even fathomed. So to think that we just like peak at 25 and then everything else is downhill is just bonkers.
That's what they want us to believe because we're no longer like malleable teens for them to just control, like at 25, 26, our brains are fully developed and you don't impress us anymore. So no wonder they want us to think life is over after that time.
Yeah, exactly.
Before we get into this topic, I just want to share a little note really fast that if you are interested in joining my mentorship program, Becoming the Oracle, even if you don't know if you're going to take the next round or you're not ready yet, I really recommend you filling out the application on angelsandamethyst.com and joining the VIP list for it, because even if you don't want to claim the spot when the next round opens, it's best to be on that list because I'm hearing quite a few of you saying, I can't wait to take this in the future. But the list is starting to already fill of who wants to join in rounds 3 and 4 and 5. And so just don't wait. If that's calling to you, apply online. And it doesn't mean that you're locked into anything. It means that you're on my VIP list to be offered spots when they open. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Very exciting.
Yes. So I also wanted to say before we get into this episode that astrology is so multidimensional and not one size fits all. So I'm going to be saying the rough ages and time periods where this hits for you, but I also recommend following along on your own chart. So I recommend just going to like astro.com or Cafe Astrology and putting in your birth chart info, and it will have all of that there. I think certain apps don't show the degrees or the actual wheel of the birth chart. So you need to know the degree that the planet is at, and it's helpful to see the actual circle. So I would do a birth chart generator and follow along there with your own chart because it's really fascinating. And the other thing I wanted to say is before I get into the actual astrological transits of the 30s and 40s that are significant, I want to set the stage. This episode, it's highly influenced by this book, The Astrology of Midlife and Aging by Erin Sullivan. She's in the spirit world now, or she would be a dream guest to have on the podcast because this book is incredible. It's so deep. And as an astrologer, I vibe with her voice in this space so much. So I'm first going to kind of talk about this rite of passage that is leaving childhood and coming into adulthood and this time period. And then I think the astrology that I talk about will plug in a way more rich, holistic way. And so, astrology, I don't want this episode to turn into stories that we're telling ourselves about who we should be when we look at our own transits and the ways that this plugs into our own chart. For example, my North Node is in Capricorn in the 10th house, my South Node is in Cancer in the 4th. And I could easily tell myself the story like that means that I've been a mom in past lives and that this life is all about business, business, business. And that's where I'm growing towards. And I think sometimes, story, in my opinion, is the enemy of intuition. And story is something that we're trying to use to make sense of things instead of our actual felt experience. And for self divination, like I always say, it's an inward seeking and feeling of deep truth and felt experiences. And the nature of self divination applies to astrology as well. I think astrology is best used as an affirmation of how we're living most authentically. Like to me, astrology is at its best when it's affirming who we know we are, when it's giving us permission to like dare to dream of our most wild dreams. And I think it's at its worst when we feel lost or dysregulated or hopeless and we're trying to make sense of the story that our chart is saying and we disconnect from our actual felt present moment experience.
That makes so much sense and is something that's been coming up for me just like all over my life. It's just so interesting how the story is really where we get caught in our suffering, in our, so much of the pain that we experience, so much of the stuckness and frustration, I feel like is the stories we're telling ourselves. And, I was really caught in a loop with that last night. And then I was able to tell almost the complete opposite story and it was equally true in a way. And so it was just like a really important thing. And I think it really applies to what you're saying. It's like, especially when we're kind of in our stuff and maybe we hear something about our chart that we are like this, I think it can make us feel like caged by that definition. And I think anytime that starts to come in, that is such a good indicator of like, there is no cage and there's no definition that you are trapped by. So don't let it suck you into those negative stories. Like you said, like try and really feel into the deep truth about that information and see how it can help you feel even more expanded into yourself.
Absolutely. And if anything, to me, stories that we use to try to make sense of things are almost more telling of just where our focus is choosing to go, not actual truth. And I think that we mistake story for truth all the time, but it's actually just what we're focused on. And it's really interesting. And so astrology is the same exact thing. We might be hyper focused on one part of our chart and missing the million other planets and aspects and layers happening everywhere else. It's like story equals focus, not truth. And I think that these patterns that get us caught up in our mind and out of truth in intuitive development recreate themselves and replay in astrology as well. If you're not used to being regulated with present moment truth and holding space for more truth than once, if hyper fixating on one story is a protector that comes up for you, astrology can be a really slippery slope and you might not engage with it in the most useful way. There might just be something that your chart says and you're not an astrologer. And so you don't see all the ways that that actually isn't the full truth of your story. And so if you're trying to come from the outside in with connecting to your birth chart instead of letting it be a mirror for your deepest, most authentic truth, that's where things can get tricky because it's like, I should be doing this. My life should look this way because of this thing in my chart. And I think shoulds are really interesting too, because shoulds show that we're out of the feeling and we're out of truth and we're into story. And I think that story is like what we're prioritizing, what feels safe, what is trying to protect us. I think story is more the realm of the ego in a big way. And I think when shoulds are coming up with our astrology, or we're grasping to make sense of our astrology or our birth chart, and we're in that should frequency, again, it shows we're disconnected from the actual truth. And so for me, I remember I got like one of my really early on astrology readings. And I think something that's really powerful about going to a practitioner outside of yourself is that they highlight and are drawn to certain aspects of the chart that you just glossed over before. And so I remember this was very early on. I want to say like 2016, when I was just starting to do angel readings for people. And this astrologer, it was actually Christina Farella of episode 102. She's amazing. So go check her out. She's so, so great. And she was like, yeah, I could see you having a really prominent career in the spiritual, mystical, psychic space. Like Neptune, the planet of like mysticism and spirituality, is like right here in your 10th house of career. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've never noticed that before. But I was so like fragile and tentative and just starting out with the angel readings that to me, that was a perfect example of how astrology is for you. It was like beyond my wildest dreams that I could turn this into a career, but like there it was in my chart showing me that. So I think astrology at its best is a permission slip and a validation to be our most authentic self.
I love that story. That's such a great example of a great way to use it. It's like you said, a way to understand ourselves. And I've definitely had that experience where just hearing, especially about my big three. I mean, my big three, we've laughed about this before, but my big three are just so me. And I think hearing about them was really like freeing and validating because it confirmed a lot of things about myself I already felt to be true. And it almost like helped me embrace them more, where it was like, yes, that is what you're like. And you don't have to feel like an oh no about it. It's like, yes, embrace those parts of yourself that are truly you.
Exactly. It's like a willingness to see everything. And that feels so powerful. And so, yeah, I wrote here our astrological charts are not predetermined portents of pain and suffering that our imagination and dysregulated nervous systems can latch onto. Story is not intuition. They are invitations to dare to be our most authentic self, permission slips to understand our gifts that we wouldn't have dared to dream if we didn't see them, and tools to understand how to co create our most powerful life. And what's really interesting is in my astro and ancestor readings, which are so powerful. I've talked about them on the pod before. I'm kind of like inventing my own astrology type that I'm calling ancestral astrology, and then tapping into mediumship and what the ancestors want to say about it. And it's been really interesting because in those reading types, in particular, we're talking about the blocks, the lessons, the struggles, the tough stuff in the lineage. And at first, I was like, is this going to be a bummer for my clients? Like, are they going to actually enjoy this experience? Like, not just talking about the magic and the gifts and the abundance in the chart, but like the tough, passed down ancestral parts of the chart. And overwhelmingly, people are like, thank goddess. Like, I didn't have words for what you're saying, and it makes so much sense. And it's making me realize, like, it's not just me or it's not my shortcoming. Like, it's contextualizing it in this different way. And so I think sometimes just focusing on like the light, the gifts, the expansion without the other more challenging layers of astrology can be like, okay, but like, why isn't that my actual felt experience right now? And so I think it's also like, yes, it can be very affirming and powerful for the gifts, but even putting words to the struggles or the blocks or the challenges, from what I've seen from my clients, it's a very freeing and empowering experience because it's like, oh, it's right there in my chart. Like, it's clearly something my soul came here to learn.
Yeah, I think it's so affirming, because our experience isn't just love and light and, happy sunshine. Like we struggle with things. And I think sometimes it can be so isolating and lonely and confusing, the things that we struggle with. And, we're all on different paths. So the thing I'm struggling with isn't the thing you're struggling with. And sometimes that can make us feel, I mean, it makes me feel ashamed. It makes me feel wrong, broken, all those things. And so, yeah, getting that affirmation, like I love the idea that I'm here on a specific soul journey to learn specific lessons and to expand in specific ways. it makes the things I struggle with seem less arbitrary and seem more important and powerful to be facing instead of just something that's hard that keeps coming up.
Yeah, I love that perspective. And it's so true. It's like our birth chart is showing an exclamation point of the archetypal consciousness and lessons that are important for us to experience. And it's so crazy to me through ancestral astrology how deep it goes with even previous generations. And our soul on a level, in my opinion. Of course, I get kind of wary about like pretending or not even pretending, but just even the idea that we can have it all figured out. But my best guess is that our souls choose these lineages for a reason because it's the perfect puzzle piece for what we're trying to like learn and progress and experience. So it's just so powerful. And now going into so in this book, The Astrology of Midlife and Aging, before she gets into the actual transits, there's so much juicy, deep stuff about the psychology of this rite of passage and this time that we're in overall in our 30s and 40s that was just so deep to me. And so the first thing is this quote in the book by Socrates that says, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And I love that quote so, so much because I've even in the mediumship world connected with souls that lived in a very unintentional way. And it's like they missed so much of what could have been for them in this life. And I feel like us, even everybody that's here, everybody that's open to this work, everybody that's interested in the tool of astrology for self reflection and deeper, authentic expression, I really think that's how we get the juice out of everything in life as well. Because like I said, it can give us a permission slip for parts of our gifts or our life or areas that our ego, it's funny that like story and focus are coming up because just like you were saying, Claire, like about what you were feeling yesterday about the story that you were telling yourself, like that's only focusing on what's not going right. And like there's a story also that you could be talking about how successful and loved and exciting your life is. Like it's just so interesting to me that the unexamined life is not worth living. And to have a true examined life, we have to not just tell ourselves a story, but look at it holistically. And that's why I love astrology too, because it's a whole picture of every area of life.
Absolutely. And it's like if we're not if we're not looking at our experience like you said, I think we miss so much magic and so much potential for growth. I mean, the things that I've really noticed and examined and worked through, I know I've grown because of that, as opposed to kind of like treading water above it all and just kind of being like, yeah, yeah, yeah. I think really it's like the shadow work we talk about. It's hard. It's confronting to look at those things. But when we do, we grow in these unimaginable ways, which only opens us up to more magic. So I think, it's really beautiful and brave to be doing this type of work and to be opening our minds to these possibilities.
1,000,000%. And I just wanted to inject a little bit of my mom's like mantra and wisdom that she shared with me. And she said, every decade of my life gets better and better. And I really agree with that so far. I just have this image up until the Saturn return. Our life is kind of like this wind up doll that as we've been turned and programmed by our family's values, trying to people please, what society values, who we've been told to be, we're going through the motions of life with this wind up doll. And to me, the Saturn return is the doll like running out of juice. And now the astrology of the 30s and the 40s is cranking the crank for ourselves to change the pattern away from what we've been wound up to be and learn a new dance that feels more authentic and expands our consciousness. And the Saturn return is kind of the first entry point into that, in my experience. And so Aaron Sullivan says, middle age astrology isn't about a slow descent towards the end of life, which is kind of what you were saying, Claire. You were like, yeah, we hit, 30 and then people think it's all over from here. And so she says it's not about a slow descent towards the end of life. It's actually an awakening, an initiation, and a rite of passage towards living more authentically. And like life keeps knocking on our door through these transits and all of these ways to shake us up to live more authentically and purposely. It's a time period of individuation away from inherited systems and programs where we learn to forge our own path ahead. And in many ways, our Saturn return sets the foundation for us in our 30s and our 40s to be more alive, more fulfilled. It's like it's not a slow descent towards death. It's actually this electric shock of awakening and potential and individuation. And so I think that's really exciting and powerful. And I like remember the moment before my Saturn return when I was like, wait, I'm in charge of my own life. And now we're in our 30s and 40s and, 50s, 60s, there's listeners of all ages, but we have more resources and agency and we know ourselves more now to take these transits in our 30s and 40s and run with them in a way that we weren't resourced in our 20s to do, or childhood, obviously.
Yes, I feel this so deeply. I almost felt like my life up until that Saturn return was like kind of how you described the zodiac up until like Aquarius, where it's like we've learned how to do life and we followed the rules, or at least this was my experience because I was a real rule follower. But, I followed the rules and I was a good little girl like I was supposed to be. And I learned how to be a human in all the ways that were kind of impressed upon me. And then I got to a point where I was awake enough and in myself enough that I could start to decide who I actually was in terms of my own experience, not in terms of how everyone wanted me to be, but who was I to who I wanted to be. And, it was turned into some acts of rebellion against the system and really deepening into self love, really finding myself and expanding into myself in a way that was truly me, not some idea of me. And so I feel like from that point on, I have become so much more myself and I have been sort of peeling back the layers that I had kind of pasted on top of me of like self identity to fulfill some idea that now I'm peeling back and getting to be the self that I've always been inside, but kind of forgot.
Yes, I love that. And I think a lot of people feel that, myself included. And so basically, through these transits and through this time of life, if our true heart needs are not being met, the transits aim to peel away, transform, reveal, wake up, uplift until we're actually connected to our truest, most authentic path. And it kind of goes back to what we talked about in episode 233, which, by the way, for the new listeners of the pod, definitely check out that episode of like blocked and stuck stagnant energy, moving through that. It's one of our most popular episodes of season 2. And it's like our mind attaches to story of what we should want or what we should do or what we should achieve. But our actual heart is where the needs are asking to be met. And then our mind makes a story that thinks will meet those needs. And so this astrology of this time is like shaking up the relationship, shaking up the job, shaking up the patterns so that we actually are living in a way where our heart's needs are being met. And I think it's really cool because as technology and consciousness progresses, so too does the astrology telling the story. Like, for example, before Uranus was discovered in the 1700s, the Saturn return was the quote unquote midlife crisis because the life expectancy was 60. So, like, as we continue to evolve, as science like found, Uranus and Neptune and Pluto and all of these things, it changes what we have the capacity to understand. And it doesn't mean that those transits weren't always there. It means they were hitting us way later. It means we didn't understand them. We weren't expanded enough to even have the capacity to understand them. And so it's so cool the way that like technology continually reveals the evolution of consciousness too, because we're also living longer than previous generations. So we're also experiencing more of the astrology while we're here. So it's just so, so cool. And so I want to also share an idea in the book about Carl Jung's idea about midlife and aging. He says basically that morning strategies don't work in the afternoon, just like afternoon strategies don't work at night. Like what we do when we wake up and to get ourselves into the day, like that's not the energy that's most suitable to the afternoon. And just like suitable to the afternoon, we're winding down at night. We're, getting ready for bed. And so basically, he's saying like childhood and early adolescence is morning strategies. We got our needs met through our morning strategies. We had to relate to our parents. We weren't really in charge of ourselves. We're still figuring ourselves out. And now we're in this energetic place of like a changing of the guard and coming into afternoon strategies. And I resonate with this so much because I think for these midlife transits and things that we're going through, which I'm just calling them midlife. I wouldn't say 30s is necessarily midlife, but just for the sake of this episode, it's kind of like this coming into this midlife chunk of no longer being an adolescent. And I think it's really interesting because what isn't working for us now is clearly when our inner children are activated and running the show, when we're blaming everything on everyone else, when we're like 45 and still talking about how our parents didn't give us the love we needed. I think like that's valid, but also this is a time period of taking radical responsibility for every part of our life. And that's part of what I think Jung means about leaving behind mourning strategies. It's like in childhood and in early life, we're trying to get everything from everyone else and like be taken care of and sourced from everyone else. And I think the afternoon strategy is like self sourcing, radical responsibility, like being that wise, loving adult for ourselves and not letting the inner child like pout and get its way. And it's not our inner child's fault. It's just that's how they learn to get their needs met. But that's a morning strategy that will not work in the afternoon.
I love that. That's such a great way to think about it and explain it. And definitely something, without even thinking about it in that way, a journey that I've been on with it, where, I think for so many of us, we don't even realize that that's what we're doing with our behavior is like trying to get our needs met and trying to get our needs met in ways that a child got their needs met, like throwing a temper tantrum or dissolving into tears and getting attention that way, and like realizing now that we can be our own safety and realizing now that we get to be the adult that takes care of us. Like you were saying, we don't need to outsource our care, we don't need to outsource our safety because we have grown into the person of safety that we can now be for ourselves. And it's a transition. It's not just like overnight you're like, oh great, I'll get my needs met in a new way. Like it takes time and practice and unraveling. But I do really feel that this has been a time period for me where I've definitely been like doing that work.
Yeah, me too. And I think also a part of this is what our morning strategy expectations are. Like, family should look like this, and this is what love looks like, and this is what this looks like. I think it's also a time of stripping away what our inner child expects or feels entitled to, and like co creating with what's in our power in these times is like very much giving afternoon strategy to me.
That's so, so true.
Yes. So, starting to get into more of the astrological stuff, in Erin Sullivan's book, she says, in her opinion, it's extremely rare that these transits can be tracked to a singular event that happens. They are more like waves of change and consciousness and shifting and waves that then translate into ripple effects. So it's very rare that it's like on this day is my Uranus opposite Uranus and my house caught on fire. Like it doesn't really work like that. It's like a growing influence. I mean, it can, and there can be things that happen, but it's really more of like a wave of energy. So I also don't think it's useful to sit around and be like, okay, like I have it on my calendar of when I'm in my Saturn square Saturn or Pluto square Pluto, like what's going to happen today? Again, I don't think that, and I've said this before, especially about Uranus, like if you can predict it, it's not Uranian. Like if you can predict what's coming. And like for me, even as a professional intuitive, like with my astrology, it never pans out the way my mind tells a story that it's going to. So I think it's like the best possible strategy is to stay present with your true emotional felt experience and go from there instead of trying to like wonder how this plugs into the story of your life. And I just want to quote Erin Sullivan because I love this woman. I wish she was still here. She's such a legend. She says to this effect: "We are not clocks. I repeat, yet. There is indeed a precise date at which astrological midlife begins, the day the planet Uranus first transits opposite to the place it is in the birth chart. Depending on who you are, your background, your family, your cultural imperative, your DNA genome structure, your place in the global ethos, and a myriad more facets of the external world, you will experience this phenomenon of exact transit of Uranus in a way that is specific to your seed need, yourself, in other words. I have an immense respect for people and their singular individuality. That is why I have spent so many years studying astrology and the human experience. I am constantly amazed and impressed with the power of the human spirit and its nemesis, its righteousness, according to the Greek meaning. That is why I attract a certain type of person as a student or a client. And nemesis is what we meet on the path of individuation, a very specific and personal experience or realization that irrevocably moves us forward to meet our future selves. I would no more typecast a person by an astrology term or cycle than I would have tried to force my children to be me instead of them. I am fascinated by the creativity in the soul, the eternal ingenuity of the mind, and the strange and inexplicable interventions of fate. I believe wholly in both fate and free will. I do not see, as many do, a split between the two, but feel them to be inextricably entwined, a both and kind of thing. Our life is not found in either a particle or a wave, perhaps in a wavicle. There is too much. You are destined to be in a difficult relationship because you have Pluto conjunct your south node in the seventh house. This is so old, so over in the third millennium. I love her. That it is frightening to think that it is still being swallowed wholesale by hapless clients or web browsers. This is dangerous astrology, not because of the obvious moral or ethical reasons, or that it is scary stuff and is negative input into a seeker's soul, but simply because it is wrong. There, I've said it. That kind of astrology is wrong. Everyone is destined to have some kind of difficult relationship in the course of life because relationships are difficult. And often we are biologically and psychoactively attracted to sexy people who stimulate our danger zones, and relationships are multi leveled. And it is unlikely that there is one person who has not had a challenging friendship, parent, sister, or colleague. And we are not perfect. Thus, our relationships are not perfect. Ideally, we learn from our experiences of pain and difficulty and move on to be less threatening in relationships. So that kind of goes on to just state so eloquently what I believe too. It's like, again, story versus intuition and big truth. And just like she said, the South Node conjunct Pluto in the seventh house is like, oh my gosh, like relationships are so hard and power struggles and toxicity. It's like, no, just don't go there and don't latch onto a story. Just stay present with the astrology. So, yeah, couldn't say it better than Erin. And she's so smart. I was like, I just love her, and her book is so good. So, definitely check it out. So, the two major planets in charge of whipping us into shape to be adults are Saturn and Uranus. And it's really interesting because Saturn and Uranus are complete opposites energetically. Saturn is about like responsibility and structure and hard work and time and routine and karma and lessons and ancestry. And Saturn is the natural ruler of Capricorn. Uranus is the natural ruler of Aquarius. Uranus is like surprises, shakeups, change, awakening, intuition. So Aquarius is like, I want change yesterday. Uranus is like, I'm ready to be a completely different person today. And Saturn is like, hold your horses. We're going to pump the brakes. We're going to make sure you get the lesson. We're going to, teach you deep soul lessons that you came here to learn. And so Saturn, stasis, Uranus, change. And they're like dancing and doing really important things through the astrology of our 30s and 40s. And in the myth story, Saturn, Kronos, was Uranus, Ornos's son. and he castrated him. So that's the mythology of Saturn and Uranus.
Whoa.
And so there's like already in the mythology a natural struggle between Saturn and Uranus. They couldn't be more opposite. And literally, it's a son that castrated his father. And that goes to show that, like, the push pull and the tension between change, awakening, authenticity, intuition, and that sort of like electric energy of Uranus gets so tampered by the delays, the obstacles, the lessons, and the tests of Saturn. So it's a really interesting tension that I think we feel in ourselves through the up level of the 30s and 40s. And so new parts of ourselves are being activated. We're really being called to lean into new energetic patterns and solutions and strategies that maybe we wouldn't have employed in our 20s and, of course, childhood. We're finding the balance in the 30s and 40s astrologically between stasis and change. And it might kind of feel like this interesting moment where we're holding both. It's like there's some things that have been the same and will be, and we're like stable in them. And then there's so much changing, and we're kind of doing this balancing act. Like, even in my client sessions, it's so common to have like one foot in, one foot out. Whereas for me, I went through such a long time period in my 20s of just the same exact thing. I mean, we're going through like school and we're doing these things, and it's just like these same patterns and routines. Whereas for a lot of us in our 30s and 40s, it's like, whoa, now I'm just out in the real world doing my thing, and I have bigger picture questions, and I sense that I want to change and an awakening and a shake up and to follow my intuition, but also where are the delays or the obstacles? And it really is this tension of opposites. It's like the odd couple astrology version.
I definitely feel that in the process of changing things. It is like such a push pull thing. And I think it can feel like this, like, okay, let's make the change. And then there's usually that part of me that's like, well, I don't know. And should we? And how should we change? And maybe we should sit down and think about the change before we do the change. Like, there is that like dynamic with it, at least for me. So it makes sense that those two things are at play and having this like epic battle in the cosmos, as I'm having this like internal battle around like wanting to change and struggling to do so.
So true. And the rite of passage of middle age is to truly know ourselves, to integrate pieces we've been denying, and to put the pieces of ourselves back together in a more authentic way. And so, through these two episodes that we're going to do on this topic, I'm going to be talking a lot about Saturn transits and Uranus transits, and some key word for Saturn transits. A big one to me that just comes through intuitively is examining where we are leaning on excuses. Like, Saturn is sort of this tough love parent energy. And to me, Saturn transits are like, but where are you co creating with that thing? Where are you co creating with what you're feeling stuck or trapped by? What's your part in it? How can you relate to it in a more mature, wise adult way? It's sort of like that example of blaming our parents for everything, blaming society for everything, blaming our friend group for everything, like whatever that pattern is, blaming your job and your boss for everything. It's like there might be some truth, but where are you co creating with that? Or what's your role in it? Or what's your power in that situation? The other thing is navigating structural changes. Like, Saturn really is so much about the structures in our life and responsibility, not just in terms of like excuses and taking responsibility, but major Saturn transits are often about taking on more responsibility or getting rid of responsibility. So a lot of people in Saturn transits like get married or have a kid or get divorced or move or quit a job, because it's all about like, what am I responsible for? And is that still working? And I think Saturn also has a deep undercurrent in my felt experience around self-worth. I think like a lot of our Saturn return experiences, if you just distill down the lesson, it's like, what are we accepting from life and how can we be in our worth a little bit more? And so I definitely think that there's a layer there. And then for Uranus transits, it is peeling away inauthentic stories and patterns, often in ways that are like surprising, quick changes, lightning bolt shocks, like intuitive knowing. And I feel like the 2 together, it's a similar but different vibe of this current Saturn Neptune astrology we've been navigating collectively. But I feel like Uranus is like giving us these inner knowings. Like Uranus is waking up parts of ourselves that, like, this isn't quite right, or I feel called to do this, or I just have this wild knowing that just flashed into me. And then Saturn's like, now how can you make a plan to actually cultivate that or bring that through? And I think that's like how the 2 connect in a way that's harmonious, is like Uranus bringing in the inspiration and then Saturn saying, now how are you going to actually work towards it?
That's such a great way to think about it too, and kind of in opposition to sort of the way we were talking about it just a second ago of how those two things can kind of feel incongruous of like wanting to make the change and feeling scared to change or worried about the logistics, and looking at it in this other way of like, great, I'm feeling this push for change, and now I'm going to figure out the steps I need to implement to support that change, because that is how life works, right? It's like we want this thing and we do have to take action towards it. And then we're co creating. So there's a lot of pieces of those puzzles that we can trust the universe is going to fill in for us. But it does take action on our part to make those changes happen. So I love thinking about that as almost like this beautiful symbiotic thing of like the drive for that change and then the structure to support it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that theme of like story is just what we're focusing on is like such an interesting through line that came through for us, because I think with all of these transits, we can tell the story of it's going to be so hard and this is really difficult and this is what's going to happen. But that's just the elements of it we're focusing on. And like you said, it's such a good reframe to be like, oh, I'm ready for aha moments. I'm ready for clarity. I'm ready for deeper awakening. And then to really put the work in, to commit, to take responsibility for birthing the version of myself that my higher self is showing me through this time.
Yeah. And another great example of like what we're focusing on and what you said a couple seconds ago of like what is in our power, what is something we can do. It's like even though the thing we focus on or the story we tell about it, is in our power. I mean, you saying that hit me like a ton of bricks because, that's something I really struggle with when I'm in my stuff. The story is so loud, and last night, I really had that moment where I was being really pulled under by one of the stories and then was able to see that story in a completely different way and be like, okay, but this is also a truth. This is also a way you could define it. And that is in my power to choose which story I focus on or to choose to see the myriad of stories that could explain this thing and not like lock into one or the other.
Yeah, I think for people that relate to that, and I'm sure everybody does because I relate to it too. I think a really helpful tool, especially if you have a practice of like connecting with your angels and your guides, is in those moments to just be like, what is the higher truth right now that I'm not seeing? Like, angels and guides, from your perspective, what is the truth here that you would have me know about this? And like going to a higher source to plug into, because it kind of reminds me of when you read a book and then the author puts out a novella of like the guy's perspective or like another person's perspective of the same story. It's like exactly what's happening within our own life. Like we have one story, and like a certain family member I'm no contact with is probably telling a completely different story than I am about the entire situation. And it's easy to get so lost in those things, but like truth is so subjective and we look for truth instead of really like listening to truth. Sometimes we're trying to make truth and make meaning. And so I think it's like so powerful. It helps me in those moments that I'm feeling lost and crunchy and the layers are confusing me and I'm too deep in it. I'll go and I'll zoom out and I'll just be like, what is the truth of this moment that you would have me know? What's the perspective from your eyes? Like, what is the truth here that I'm not seeing? And it's really helpful.
That's so beautiful. I'm definitely going to try that.
Yeah, you can even pull a card or do something like that or journal, but even just sitting with that question and opening to truth and staying open to something that might surprise you. Like all intuitive information, that's the best is like, oh, how did I not see that? So, again, follow along on your own birth chart. And this might kind of vary from exact date to exact date. So look at your own chart. So age 36 to 37 is the first important big thing for these classic transits. I was debating talking about, for those of us with Saturn and Capricorn, transiting Pluto conjunct our natal Saturn, and that was fucking crazy. But it's not like that for everyone in the 30s and 40s. It was like specifically for a chunk of us with a certain Saturn placement. So I'm not going to go into that. But if you have natal, meaning in your birth chart is natal and transiting is live, what's happening with the planets. So if your natal Saturn is in Capricorn, especially in the degrees of like 12 to 25, look up when Pluto was at that degree of Capricorn, which was in 2024, 2023, 2022, 2021, like the early 2020s is when it happened. And just look back to that time and what a kick in the pants that was for us, because not every Saturn, because Pluto takes 248 years to go around the whole zodiac, not every Saturn sign is going to meet up with Pluto. So for some of you guys, you're in the clear. But for those of us with Saturn in Capricorn and now Aquarius, like Pluto will be meeting up with it. And to me, that was a transit where after that, I saw how resilient and powerful I was through those times. It was also my Saturn return while it was happening. So I was under like just a lot. But I just want to put a little asterisk side note. If the early 2020s were intense for you, or if you had Saturn at those degrees, or if you have Saturn now at early degrees of Aquarius, look into that, because it might be a pressure cooker type of sensation that you're navigating. And basically the themes are really letting things die away that need to go, taking your power back, putting in the discipline and the hard work to be there for yourself and to create healthy structures. And just know that if you are navigating one of those transits, it's not going to be that intense forever. So that could be like, if you're like, why is this feeling so crazy? That could be why. So all that to say, if you have natal Saturn in Capricorn or Aquarius, just look into that and know that it won't be that intense forever, and that you're just in a huge Phoenix energy portal of growth and personal power. And I went through that and it was intense, but the version of self I am on the other side, I honestly wouldn't trade it. I feel so much more equipped to like get all the juice out of life as this version of self than the one that was people pleasing and giving my power away and letting myself be treated badly before all of those lessons. So age 36/37 is a really interesting one. And again, coming back to this theme of like opposites and polarities, we have our Jupiter return at 36. And we have a Jupiter return every like 11 years or so, because that's how long it takes Jupiter to go around the zodiac wheel. But this is our first time as an astrological adult. So Jupiter, and I'm in mine this year because I'm turning 36. So when Jupiter moves into Leo and I turn 36, that will be my time. And Jupiter return is basically a time Jupiter rules expansion and abundance. It also rules truth and wisdom. And so it's our first time as an astro adult to be like, what do I really believe about the world? How can I move more authentically, and like kind of reviewing, like, what is my truth? What is my wisdom? What do I believe? And so some key themes for this can be expansion, truth, abundance, wisdom. And I really feel like this is going to happen and affect like political and spiritual beliefs as well, because it's part of like what we filter our consciousness through. And I'm not even in my Jupiter return yet. And I already feel my mind being blown wide open when it comes to like deconstructing patriarchy and like getting to deeper layers of these things. And I know that's also just the time that we live in. But for a lot of us, like around the age of 36, we might just sort of wake up to things in a deeper way or see things in a more expanded way. And so it's not all roses. Like this is our consciousness expanding and like wanting to think bigger. We might even travel abroad or start a new area of study. Like it's all about expanding our horizons when you go through a Jupiter return. And of course, the sign that it's in and the house that it's in also applies. So plug that into your own chart. But at the same time, we're in our Saturn square Saturn, which means our natal Saturn, which again, there he is, Sky Daddy Saturn, as they say. The like tests and karma and delays and lessons. The Saturn that's transiting is making a square or a harsh aspect at the same time as the Jupiter return. So it's like, yes, all of this expansion and joy and deeper truth and seeing clearer than ever before and expansion of consciousness and maybe ways that we can be more visible. Like for me, my Jupiter is in Leo. So maybe my Jupiter in Leo might bring creativity or romance or passion or visibility or ways I can step into my leadership. So look into what your Jupiter is. But again, then we also have Saturn square Saturn at the same time. I just want to say, Claire, your Jupiter is in Capricorn in the sixth house. So for you at the around the age of 36, there might have been ways that you're like more responsible or working towards career goals or finding more organized, efficient systems. There also might be ways that you were like taking care of your health or becoming more like tapped into routines or productive systems or just thinking about career goals. Do you remember that time at all or what was coming up for you?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about it. I feel like I was in kind of a bit of like a nebulous phase where I was kind of trying to start doing the online videos, maybe like just starting it and kind of like not really able to find my way with it, but giving it a go. Yeah, I mean, we would have been deep in the pandemic then. And so, I was dealing with that, it was kind of hard to be dealing with.
Hard to expand.
Yeah, in that moment. And it was such a crazy transition for me because I had had so much momentum going into the pandemic. And then it felt like everything fell apart and crumbled, and I had to like really rebuild. So it was definitely like a moment of like rebuilding, but I was looking at different jobs and finding new ways to make money. So it definitely was like a shifting moment for me.
And again, you were also in your Saturn square Saturn. So it was like two things at once. But you can see how the seeds of that time planted expansion for where you are growing and going now, which is sometimes how it works too, where it's not like one obvious thing, like Aaron Sullivan said, but you look back and you're like, look at the systems I built and what I started and the seeds I planted and the way my mind shifted or the way I was being course corrected and what it's blooming into.
Yeah. And that's such a good example, too, of what you said at the top, where we think like, oh, this shift happens. And so then it's like the whole change happens. But it's sort of like the first piece that allows the shift to unfold. And then, a few years later, we can look back and be like, oh, that was the start of this shift. But it doesn't necessarily feel like the full shift just in that first moment.
Yes, that's such a good point. Aaron Sullivan was talking about how seeds have the entire consciousness already implanted in what they're going to grow into. So, like a lemon seed is different than an orange tree seed. And like they know what they're going to be already just from being a seed. And so I love that because it's not like a meal is put inside of you and you're already digested and the meal is done as soon as the transit hits. It's like the meal is put in front of you and you're starting to smell the smells of the meal and you're starting to get hungry and maybe you take a bite and then you start to digest. Like, I think that's so important to say because we do randomly have this story in our head that astrology happens instantaneously or will be clear instantaneously. And I think there is this like natural process of integration, which in this metaphor would be the digestion that then pays off in different ways that our mind wouldn't have necessarily thought in the beginning. But these key themes of like the timing and the planets are really helpful to just look back and be like, huh, yeah. So the Saturn square Saturn is referred to as the mini Saturn return. And so it happens every 14 and a half years, starting from the age of 7. And after the one at 36, 37, there's another one around 51. And the one before this one was at 22. So again, this is our first time stretching our wings as astrological adults. And we're starting to be retested. It's kind of like the Saturn return is these key themes of what we're learning and what we're going through and like what we're here to learn on a soul level and how to be mature. And it's like, okay, you did your Saturn return and everything shifted. Again, as Rachel Kelly, our therapist, says, the universe teaches through repetition. It loves repetition. It loves a good cycle. So Saturn's like, hey, I'm back, not as intensely as your Saturn return, but I'm causing just enough friction. I'm pumping the brakes, which for you is so relevant to that COVID time that it was hitting for that, which is so interesting. I'm pumping the brakes and like, how are you doing with the test material? Did you forget everything? Are you implementing it? How integrated is it? And so this is where we are looking at the reoccurring themes of like wisdom and maturity and responsibility and discipline and structures and goals and self-worth and seeing like, are we relating to this in the most wise and mature way? And are we remembering what we learned in our Saturn return? And so, some themes to consider here is like maturity, responsibility, discipline, structures, goals, foundations, turning points. I feel like Saturn transits can also be major turning points for things. Soul lessons, karma, patterns that need to be broken. Also, how we relate to authority figures is a big one for Saturn. Like, who in the authority figure, like your boss, how is that connecting to ways that your parents were? Like, there's just these really interesting cycles and patterns that can come up. This can also be a time at 36 where we like pay off debt or we get really serious about like tending to the structures of things, or we start to really look at where we're feeling blocked or out of alignment in our life and actually making serious goals or new strategies to fix the problems. We're cutting off excess and misalignment. And basically, the way to navigate this time period is like moment to moment. What is the more mature, wise choice that I can make that I didn't make before? And I feel like for me, there's also an element of the mini Saturn return tied to how we see our parents, and like seeing our parents as people instead of our parents feels really tied to this time period too. And like reparenting work is so tied to Capricorn because Capricorn is like ancestral patterns and traditions, and Saturn is the natural ruler of Capricorn. So there's also this way of like being your own adult, cycle breaking, making different choices than your parents, seeing your parents for their faults and flaws and loving them anyway because they're just doing it the first time too. Like, of course, if your parents are like super abusive and toxic and traumatic, that's not what I'm talking about, but just the basic ways that parents trigger us or don't love us the way we need them to love us, like kind of just seeing that they're just humans as well. And we're also humans and adult, I think is like a part of this rite of passage as well.
I don't know if I can remember it at that exact time, but I feel like the past 6, 7 years have really been an experience of that slowly shifting and changing, and I feel like I went through a period of really feeling a lot of that pain and frustration and anger around some of the stuff, and now finding, like, peace and love and acceptance on the other side of it.
I love that. There's also an intuitive hit to me around the Saturn square Saturn and how we're in a patriarchal capitalistic society where we really look for our self-worth from the outside in. And since Saturn is so tied to self-worth to me and maturity, I think this time period is also bringing up an examination around shame. Like, where am I with my goals? What do I want? And like, I feel intuitively that 36, 37 is like a really interesting moment that Jupiter return and Saturn square Saturn is happening at the same time, because there's like on one end this feeling of I'm ready to expand, I'm ready to live in more wisdom, I'm ready to sort of have all of this benefic, beautiful, magical energy that Jupiter brings. And then the Saturn square Saturn is like, but where do I feel shame? Where do I feel like I'm falling short? Where is that an emotional messenger that I could actually relate to some of these things that feel shameful in a more powerful, mature way?
Shame is such a sneaky one, and I definitely, especially with my work with Rachel and, I think when you examine some of those shadows or when you expand, I think shame comes up because it's just so tied into pain and struggle. And I think it's like a weird safety net that we go to of like if we can shame ourselves, we're in control or we can manage the situation or have a different outcome if we can really like if it was our fault, then maybe we can shift it or whatever. And I think it's one of the hardest emotions and also just so important to see where it pops up for you because truly loving yourself unconditionally, you're going to have to navigate that shame and find a way to love yourself for doing the best job you could in the moment as you did it. I think there's so much more. It's like I always think of it as like a coach, and maybe I know some people respond well to like tough, aggressive love, but personally, I've never been one of those people. Like I need encouragement and enthusiasm. And so it's funny that I internally give myself tough love when I know for a fact that doesn't help me or work for me. So just really trying to shift that dynamic and embrace and love the parts of us that feel that shame too.
Yeah. And I think it's funny here because I even have written, how can you be kinder to yourself through this transit? And I think that like self-love and being kind to yourself, it's all interconnected. And this Jupiter return that's supposed to be this like magical, expansive portal coming at the same time as our Saturn square Saturn is not an accident because Saturn square Saturn is revealing what wants to be related to in a more powerful, kind, considerate, compassionate way so that we can actually expand and interact with everything that Jupiter is bringing to us and enjoy it. Like we can't embody pleasure and joy and opportunities and expansion and miracles while simultaneously not taking responsibility or being mean to ourselves or leaning into shame or blaming other people. It's like Jupiter is revealing what needs to be shifted so that we can expand, and Saturn square Saturn is creating the tests and lessons and delays and obstacles to give us the chance to do it.
I love that. And it's like kind of goes back to what we were talking about that symbiotic relationship of looking at it in that way of how these things are opportunities to help us grow and expand versus thinking of them as like difficult things that we have to sort of like combat. It's like they're a doorway for our expansion and they're here to help us, they're for us.
Exactly. And so, one last layer I want to add to this conversation, Pluto, which is like the underworld, shadow, personal power. I think the shame thing really connects with Pluto too. It's like the parts of us that we repress or deny or don't think are worthy, death, endings, grief, like all of these like heavy hitter things are ruled by Pluto. And so transiting Pluto is making a square, again, tension to where Pluto is when you were born. Around the ages of 36 and 37, but can be a little bit later as well. Pluto is a really hard planet to track because it has such a long and irregular cycle where it's like retrograding and this and that. But it hits for us in our late 30s, early 40s if you're born between 1979 and 1995. But this is basically a moment that really brings into focus like power dynamics, power struggles, shadow, death, endings. It's like a big Phoenix energy moment. And these squares, it's like if you do the shadow work on yourself and you know yourself and you're living consciously, you're going to relate to these things in a different way than someone who's just like self-sabotaging and being super unconscious and these things wake them up with like a cold glass of water in the face. So I just want to say that. But this is really a deep, 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 deep transit. So look at where your Pluto is. Right now, Pluto currently is in the early degrees of Aquarius. So for those of us with Pluto in Scorpio, that's making a square. And when you look at your own birth chart, you can see that because the fixed signs square the other fixed signs. So if you have a fixed Pluto, like Pluto in Scorpio, it's going to square Pluto in Aquarius. I hope that makes sense. So, this is a moment that is a really big one because it's once in a lifetime. Luckily, we only have to live through our Pluto square Pluto once in our lifetime. And again, it's super irregular because Pluto spends 12 to 31 years in each sign. So it could be 12 years, it could be 31. Like, we don't know. And so it's really hard to say, like, for this astrology episode, it was really hard for me to be like, at this age, this, and at this age, that, because that's just not always, it's a highly personalized experience. So I hope you'll follow along on your own chart with what I'm saying. So this is really big and it lasts around 18 months. It doesn't mean it will be at its most intense for 18 months, but it's like these themes and reclamation of power and phoenix energy and death and rebirth and figuring ourselves out, like all of that will be very prevalent for this time period. I think those of us that have already gone through the Saturn conjunct transiting Pluto that I talked about, I think we may already be very equipped for this because we've lived through such Plutonian energy ourselves. But yeah, it's powerful. And the version of self that will be reborn from this transit is also the one that will create the most fulfilling, rewarding life for yourself. So there's so much power in this. And so Pluto is a generational planet. Like, some people will be like, I have Pluto and Scorpio too, but like everybody born from 1979 to 1995 has Pluto and Scorpio. So it's a generational planet. And it also shows, like, for that reason, Pluto square Pluto isn't just about what's happening on the personal level. It also is really impacting like what's happening in the world and how our generation is here to help it. So, just an example to go through the different Pluto placements. Pluto in Virgo, which are the people from 1956 to 1971, their generation is really about deep transformation around how they take care of themselves, health, routines, even like anxiety and mental health. That's a little bit more Scorpio, but there's also a little overlap with the Pluto and Virgo generation, but there's just a deeper consciousness with that generation about than their predecessors around health. And then Pluto in Libra, which is 1971 to 1984, that is deep transformation around marriage and partnership. So a lot of the people in that generation are like normalized couples therapy or saw what their parents were doing in marriage and were like, that's not going to be me in my marriage. And there's like a lot of cycle breaking and shifting of consciousness there. Us, the Pluto and Scorpio generation, we normalized therapy. We're super interested in shadow work. We're really interested in mental health. Like, that's what our generation is coming here to really look at. Like, no, no, no. What's the true depth and embodied experience of the shadow? We're not glossing over it like previous generations did. Pluto in Sagittarius is here to like heal the witch wound, question religion, look at guru consciousness differently, tap into their own wisdom. And that's from 1995 to 2008. And their Pluto square Pluto won't happen until around 48. So Pluto's from Scorpio, Virgo, Libra. That's the ones that are really going to hit in the 30s and 40s more. Pluto and Sagittarius will hit at the end of the 40s. And then Pluto and Capricorn won't hit until their second Saturn return, which is 58, 59. And Pluto and Capricorn is going to be a really powerful generation. They're the ones born from 2008 to 2024. And that's about like questioning patriarchy, power structures, and old traditional ways. So there's like so much with that. But this Pluto square Pluto is like activating us, not on a personal level, but also like what our generation came here to do and fight for and look at, and like how our medicine as a generation is here to help the world around us. So it doesn't have to all be like everything falling apart and everything on fire in our personal life.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I know. I actually think that you're in yours right now, Claire.
I feel that. It's been a challenging time for sure.
Yeah, but it's also waking you up to such power, and like it's like the phoenix, you know? It's like the shedding of the ashes is so uncomfortable, and like relating to things that we used to relate to in a less powerful way is so uncomfortable. But then on the other side of it, it's like, oh, yes, thank you.
I'm hopeful for that feeling and feel it happening for sure. You know, it's been a lot of shedding and a lot of yeah, stuff I'm trying to move through and let go of for sure.
Yeah. So powerful. And the themes again for this are death and rebirth, metamorphosis, endings, shadow work, personal power. I think a lot of people lean into like the self help space in their Pluto square Pluto. There's like a big search for meaning sometimes. Like when all of these transits are hitting at once, it's like, what is happening? And I sometimes need support, crossroads, and change. And if we haven't been doing the work on ourselves, I think it can be a real tower moment for people. I think you're so like awake and aware and like kind of on top of your Pluto square Pluto that I think that, you're navigating it in a way that I know the energy hasn't been as easy for you, but you're handling it. You're holding Pluto square Pluto by the horns and you're getting in the dirt with Pluto square Pluto and you're like wrestling Pluto square Pluto to the ground. And I think that like the Pluto square Pluto for the people that are like, what's a birth chart? Or not even what's a birth chart, but like, what's therapy? I don't know what I believe. What's an inner child? Like the people that aren't doing the inner work at all, this transit might hit you like a ton of bricks. Like, what are you co creating with that is not working for you? And so I think that Pluto, Aaron Sullivan says that Pluto holds our aloneness. And so Pluto square Pluto is a time where we're really aware of like we came into this world alone and we're leaving alone. And it can be also a time where we're thinking about like our mortality, or we might even be feeling the pressures of like aging. Those themes might start to come up. This might be a time where a lot of people feel a lot of pressure to like look younger or cling on to youth because Pluto rules death and endings. And Pluto square Pluto is like just that sense of sometimes isolation or fear or grief, or grief is a big keyword for Pluto square Pluto. It's like, where is the grief coming up? But that's like a really, really deep one. And so Pluto square Pluto can feel like we're dying because a version of us really is actually dying. But that doesn't mean another version won't take its place in a way that's way more powerful and aligned. So where Saturn is like the structural changes, Pluto is like a deep mental health examination and like crossroads. And it's just a deep, deep, deep transformative time.
Wow, it's so interesting. There's always no accidents on Magic Hour. And I mean, literally yesterday, because I was like really in my stuff yesterday, I was like, oh, I think what I'm feeling is just grief. I think it's just so many layers of grief. And today I was like, maybe I need to look into some healing modalities that just really center on grief and not so much about like, shifting my mindset, but just like holding the grief and processing the grief. So, just so interesting that that's what you brought up, and definitely rings true for sure.
I know. Like, what are the odds that you're exactly in your Pluto square Pluto at time of recording?
I know.
That's so interesting.
It's like my angels created magic hour so that you could help me through life each episode.
I'm here for it, honestly. I love it. I would be doing this anyway.
Yes, it's worked out very well for me. So thank you for everyone else who's also a part of this.
Yeah. And I sit with a lot of people in their 30s and 40s, and a lot of people going through their Pluto square Pluto. And it can be a range of experiences. But I think also, like, a big part of transitions, going back to that Carl Jung quote of like, morning strategies don't work for the afternoon, like, we might be grieving the morning. We might be grieving that adolescence that we're not in anymore. And like that's also like times of change and transition naturally bring up grief because something has to be lost or ended for something new to come in. And I think sometimes too, we have so many ideas and expectations of like, by this age, this, by this time, that. And I think the Pluto square Pluto is like a very natural moment to grieve and assess and release and like tend to the deeper emotionality, because being a human is such a layered and a complicated experience. And like every single person has ideas of what that's going to look like. And life very rarely exactly matches that. Like if you would have told me that my mom wouldn't be here to see me get married or this or that, like we all have these things that we have to grieve. And sometimes like our happiest moments also puts into sharpness how much grief we're feeling too. And it's just that duality of the human experience. And I think we can feel a lot of shame around grief, talking about shame coming up. And I think Pluto square Pluto almost like turns the volume up on our shadows so much that we can't avoid looking at the grief.
Yeah, that's such a good point too, the shame around it. I think there's so much pressure on us to feel, or I feel a lot of pressure to have a really beautiful, fulfilling life. Maybe I'm just putting that pressure on myself. And so I think when we're in our pain, there can be just like a lot of shame about this. Like, I don't want to be struggling with this. I don't want to be feeling grief. I want to be happy. I want to, I don't see other people struggling a lot. So I feel like I'm isolated in my struggling. But I think it's important to recognize too, like, most people I know don't know about when I'm struggling. And they probably see me and think, oh, Claire's so happy and lighthearted and, she's got it all together or whatever. And so just, when those feelings come up, like there is nothing more human than having those experiences and the duality of experience, like you said, of like being in such deep joy and also carrying deep grief with us. Like that is being a human.
Yeah, and I think we avoid the shadow so much just as part of being a human. Like we said, it's like it's not fun to like be in the shadow. Like we're here for such a short time. I want to have fun. And I think Pluto square Pluto is like yes, and sometimes the richness of exploring the shadow and feeling our feelings and the emotional depth and processing the grief actually makes the joy and the abundance hit so much harder because we're fully integrated. And so, yeah, really interesting. And I think Pluto square Pluto also really connects to me with that pressure that you were talking about. Like, again, this sense of like, I don't have forever on earth and I want to make something of it. And these are the things I'm feeling. And so I think Pluto square Pluto can also bring up those feelings, and the 30s and 40s can anyway. And so there's just this sense of us really watching the stories that we're telling about time and expectation, and also just seeing like, okay, I'm ready to be in this completely different phase of life in this midlife section firmly. And how can I create the new afternoon strategies while just letting go of what my expectations or what I felt entitled to or what worked for me in the morning?
Yeah. And trusting that opening up to that allows for all this unexpected magic to come in. I mean, there have been so many things in my life, so many examples, and I'm sure we all have them where we couldn't have planned for this, or we set out to do something and it had this unexpected, awesome result. And so just really trusting that openness to shift and change can lead us to so many beautiful things. Like we really just don't know what's going to happen next. And that is terrifying and also so exciting.
I agree. Could not agree more. And so I just Googled it to be clear, and the Pluto square Pluto can happen between the ages of 36 and 42. So see where it hits for you. In Erin Sullivan's book, she said 36, 37, but then I was like, wait, that doesn't make sense right now for what we're literally seeing with Claire's chart. So I was like, hold on. So I Googled it, and look for your own Pluto square Pluto again for the Pluto and Scorpio generation. When Pluto in Aquarius matches the degree that your natal Pluto is at, that's when you'll be in your Pluto square Pluto. But again, these things are not just pinpointed to a moment. They're slow moving planets. So the tides of energy are slow and they wash over us in different ways. So, yeah. And you might even be feeling this and you're like, I'm 35, like whatever. Just take what resonates and leave the rest with all of this stuff. But yeah, I think we should call it there. There's so many other important things. Like the official midlife marker is our Uranus opposite Uranus, and there's so much to say about that that I think we should save that for a part 2. We have like Neptune square Neptune, Saturn trine Saturn. Like we have these really big things to still talk about. Our nodal reversal and our nodal return. It's like there's so much, and I want to do it justice, and we're already over an hour. So, yeah, I love talking about this. I find it so interesting, and I cannot believe the synchronicity of you being in your Pluto square Pluto, Claire.
I know. And just so many synchronicities in this episode. And so beautiful to be able to talk about it. And like we were saying at the top, be feeling something and then have this beautiful confirmation and affirmation that, like, yeah, you are feeling that because that's what's happening for you in this moment and it's natural and right. And so I don't need to feel like ashamed for experiencing it. It's actually a beautiful portal to change, a beautiful phoenix portal for me. And so that's definitely made me feel very comforted.
And that's exactly what I was talking about with the astrology and ancestors reading. You'd think talking about such a heavy, deep, tough thing would be like, oh man. But like you said, it actually makes you feel comforted and held. And like it's a part of our universal soul journey because it is. It's not just like something Claire is going through. It's like, no, our consciousness evolves at this age in this way. And that's literally written in the stars.
Yeah, exactly. And that's so, it's kind of exciting then in that way, versus like feeling wrong or daunted or just kind of ashamed for struggling. I think we can all feel so ashamed for having a hard time. But what if we looked at those things as opportunities for change and called ourselves brave for facing it?
Exactly. I love that. Yes. And you know, Pluto square Pluto is intense, but we all have flashlights, and that's like our higher self and our truth and our angels and guides. Like, we're never alone in what we're navigating. And even having this community, it's like I know so many of you guys are going to resonate with this and are going through your own Pluto square Plutos and your own Saturn square Saturns and your own Jupiter returns. And like, we're all in this together. What I found from doing this work is that when I just share what I'm going through personally, it's like every single person connects in some way. Like, we're really not that unique.
I so agree. It's like just recording our episodes, I feel so seen, and I hope you all do too in your own unique ways. It's beautiful to have this community and to be able to connect in this wild experience that is life.
Absolutely. So, we'll definitely record a part two. I don't want to do too many astrology episodes in a row. So, we have one episode in between and then the astrology episode. So, I think three astrology episodes in a row is just too much. So, we will have part two coming up for you a little later. And because of that, I'll put something out if you guys want to ask any questions or send anything through. We love you so much. And let's transition to sitting with spirit. Welcome back to Sitting with Spirit, my loves, the part of the podcast where I sit with our angels, our guides, our loved ones in the spirit world and give the messages for the collective. As always, take what resonates, leave the rest. And if you know somebody who could benefit from this message, please send the pod their way. All the support is so appreciated. Okay, so as I was tuning into the energy this week, and whenever you're finding this is when you're meant to hear this, it doesn't have to just be the week the pod comes out. I feel a very deep, expansive energy right now. And I was seeing my symbol for crossroads energy, for growth, for change. And I was also seeing the symbol of a baby. And when I see a symbol for a baby, it can be an actual baby, like a human baby, or it can be like a rebirth moment, new life, new project, something that we're birthing into reality from energy. And so when I saw this baby symbol, it was a little bit in shadow, and it didn't feel like it was in a negative way that it was in shadow. It felt more like it's in the womb and it's cooking and it's developing and it's being ready to be birthed. And so I feel like we're on this precipice of two very different energies at once. The first is this sense of like newness and growth and expansion. And then the second is old stories and programmings holding us back from the newness, like second guessing ourselves, doubting ourselves, being in our heads, scarcity consciousness. And a really big theme and through line that I feel called to talk about right now is that story does not equal truth. In fact, story is the enemy of intuition. Story is a protector that humans use to try to feel in control, for pattern recognition, and to understand or to craft narratives that make us feel like we understand things that might be layered or dynamic or out of our control. And it's so tempting to tell stories. It's also a natural and sometimes subconscious habit and pattern to continue to operate in the world from outdated and outgrown and inherited stories that are actually inauthentic to us. And I feel like right now, with this deep, deep energy, it might reveal to us the stories that we're telling ourselves that are keeping ourselves from actually birthing what wants to come next. And it feels like instead of being in our head, instead of trying to tell stories, instead of trying to say, well, this is just this type of person and this is that and this is how I am, is that really true? And how can you come back to just sitting with your authentic, truthful, present moment experience and co creating present moment to present moment? Because I really feel like we're in this place where our angels and guides are talking about new energetic strategies. What's really interesting too is that I feel like some of this deep energy is story triggering misery, and story being something we lean into that is more about what we're focusing on than actual truth. And story puts us into what I call a dead end frequency. And we have a whole episode about this, episode 233, and I believe 238 are the two parts about dead end frequencies, navigating feeling stuck or blocked. If you haven't listened to those yet, I highly recommend it. And I feel like story takes us out of the present moment and into what we fear, what we think is going to happen next, what we think we're worthy of, what our parents' story was. And so how that connects to us, it just takes us into the mind. And I feel like that keeps us from actually making tangible, aligned, authentic steps in the present moment. And it takes us out of being the author of our own life story and plugging into stories that have been inherited or that we're comparing to other people's stories. Or I really feel this too around like scarcity consciousness. And by this age, I should have this. And by this time, I should have this. This is what family should look like. This is what intuition looks like. This is what this looks like. Like these are all just stories. And when we plug into those stories and disconnect from the present moment, we are no longer authoring our own life. And right now, we are being called to remember that we are the authors of the story, not the readers, not the receivers, not the ones trying to predict what's going to come next. And so, as I continued to tune in, I saw a lot of solar plexus chakra energy. And solar plexus is in the stomach. And I saw this pathway of yellow light, which yellow is the color of the solar plexus. And some themes tied to solar plexus is personal power, identity, inner child, confidence, and stories of self. And the feeling that I got is that this yellow color and the pathway of yellow light, the message there for me is that the way forward on our highest timeline is co creating with things that are life giving instead of story that's zapping us out of our joy, taking us out of the present moment, leaning us towards entitlement or victim consciousness or these dead end frequencies trying to protect us, but that ultimately keep us feeling stuck and blocked and bitter and resentful. And so I feel like right now is all about the present moment truths and even consciously authoring the stories tied to gratitude or presence or what is in our control or creativity that are life giving, because it feels like we're in this really interesting precipice moment where we don't really have energy to spare for things out of our control that are life draining, especially stories that we're telling ourselves. And so I also saw some witch wound being triggered as well around the stories of like what feels safe in terms of vulnerability, visibility, even trying our best. Like we can hold ourselves back in so many ways because it feels safer, and that witch wound feels like it's being triggered. It just feels like a really important moment to be intentional clear and present with the stories that can be sneaky, that actually are not rooted in truth and are keeping you away from life-giving energy and into life-taking energy. And so it feels like we're in this moment where we're so ready for newness and we're so ready to move forward. And I feel a message here around releasing hyper focus tied to story, what we should want, what we should be manifesting, what area we should be looking at, what our goals should be. It feels like our angels and guides are like sending these waves of inspiration and momentum and little like pulling us towards the things that might expand us or stretch us out of an uncomfortable comfort zone. But it feels like we might be missing those things because we're hyper focused on the story or area we think we should be looking at right now. So just stay open. Notice where hyper focus is coming in. Notice where attachment to outcomes is coming in, and try to find more flexibility whenever you're listening to this. Stay flexible. If an energetic strategy has been proven to not work for you time and time again, it feels like being flexible and open to new ones. And I pulled a card for the week, and it was the Two of Wands. And it made me smile because it felt really, really tied to everything we're talking about right now. And I feel like our angels are like, we are in partnership with you. We are co-creating with you. This Two of Wands gives me this like fiery spark feeling, like the light coming back, or our drive, momentum, focus, going towards our goals, energy. These are all the like yellow light feelings that I saw. And it feels like it's a time for us to be excited, to get motivated, to again keep co-creating with life-giving choices. That can be things that make us feel joyful, things that push us out of the comfort zone, things that are creative and generative. Stay focused on your goals and just to the best of your ability, let go of the timing, let go of what is out of your control, and continue to co-create and to stay focused on aligned action steps that are in your control. So yeah, new sparks, finding your fire, working with your angels, following the momentum. And some keywords of the Two of Wands are plans, partnerships, and influence. So there might be aligned partnerships. You might be getting momentum with your goals and it's shifting things. You might have a new plan or idea or strategy that is exciting you or lighting you up that you can start to take steps towards. So it very much feels like there's movement this week. It very much feels like it's time for like forward movement strategy and go, 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 but not only in one fixed, hyper focused way, but in a way that's mutable and co creating with where the momentum is taking you. And so, going into the mediumship this week, I connected with a gentleman in the spirit world. I felt like he had a connection to the Navy. And then it feels like after his service, he like retired to a plot of land and lived in nature. I was getting a B name with him. And he was showing me that he lived in this wild land with a lot of animals, like a little farm. And he was highlighting like the chickens and how funny and entertaining he found the chickens and how healing it was for him after a time of service to be with the animals, to be on the land. And it really felt to me like this spirit person was echoing what our angels were saying about story, because he was saying, first of all, how healing it was for him to be there. But he was saying one of the most healing parts is that with animals and in nature, there is no story. Animals are just like in the present moment, doing their thing, thinking about food, most likely, just doing what's in their control. And they're not really caught up in story. And there's something very freeing and healing about animals. And they can be such teachers for us in that way. But he was also saying that we have a very sneaky collective story that simplicity is not enough, that a simple life of just the land, animals, nature, being with your partner, whatever it is, we are letting this subconscious program run us into the ground that somehow, if we are not constantly raising the bar of how we measure success, that we're a failure, that simplicity is not enough. And really, if you find joy in the simple things that you love, you will always be rich. You will always be abundant on a soul level. And so, nature, simplicity, silence, joy, those things are enough to the soul. And I know that we're not just living in a society where we can all just lay by the river and eat fruit. I wish that we were. But there is a level of, are we pushing ourselves towards this goal because it actually feels joyful and exciting and like a heart yes? Or are we doing it from the sneaky story that if we don't, we're not enough? If we're not recognized, if we're not making a certain amount of money, if we're not hitting certain goals, if we're not manifesting externally in some way, what are the stories that we're telling ourselves about that? Because we are meaning makers. Our brain loves to make meaning out of everything. And the meaning that we make is very rarely the truth, especially if it's not a conscious process of making meaning. And so let yourself be with more simplicity. Let yourself be in nature more. Let yourself be in silence. It reminds me of that message I got that society is a playground for the ego and nature is a playground for the soul. And I really feel like this gentleman in the spirit world had such a happy, fulfilled life. And he didn't need the validation, the recognition. He didn't need what everybody else's story said success was for him to have that full, connected, successful life for himself. And I really feel like the message here is the same for you guys. Don't need the validation or recognition externally to make you feel good about your life. Live from an internal GPS system of giving your heart what it asks for. And that will attract the right people to you. That will attract the right situations. That will attract the quote unquote most successful life, because sometimes people climb the corporate ladder or become a doctor or get married and have kids or do things because they think they should be doing them, which really boils down again to the stories we've inherited or the stories we're telling ourselves about success and worthiness. And then they get there and it feels hollow or it doesn't feel authentic. And so sometimes if our goals or our manifestation, the brakes are being pumped on them, there might be a deeper reason where the story that you're telling yourself isn't matching up with really what your heart says to be true. So just feels like a very powerful moment where things are feeling like they're shifting, expanding, and changing. And your angels and guides and this spirit person just want you to make sure that you're really cognizant of the stories and the meaning that you're attaching to what you're calling in, and that you're going to move forward in a really conscious way. And even rewriting the story, intentionally authoring the story that really feels like a full heart yes to you, and operating from there. So I really hope that these messages were helpful. Sending so much love to you all, and we will see you next week. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Magic Hour podcast. We are so happy you're here. I absolutely love to connect with you all on Instagram at angels_and_amethyst. I love to get your thoughts on each episode, and I get so excited to get your emails to contact@magichourpod.com. Make sure you're subscribing to Magic Hour so you never miss a new episode in your inbox. We have so many amazing guests right around the corner. As always, please make sure to send your 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify to contact@magichourpod.com, and we'll enter you into an angel reading giveaway with me, which is just my favorite thing, to get to connect with the Hummingbird community in that way. You get a bonus entry if you also send a screenshot of your YouTube subscription. and also a screenshot of sharing us on your story and tagging us at Magic Hour Podcast on Instagram. The next giveaway will happen when we hit 288 5-star reviews on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We so appreciate you sharing the podcast with other magical people, and it really helps us keep this project alive. To learn more about me, my work, to book a reading with me, to take a workshop, please visit angelsandamethyst.com. And remember, you are magic.